Morning, everyone. We're just going to give it a couple of minutes to let everyone join. All right, so let's kick off. Just some quick housekeeping points. We have a questions section that's open throughout, and we will answer those at the end of the webinar. Cool. So in the push for a clean power system, solar developments are set to play a major role, contributing up to 47 gigawatts of the carbon-free electricity generation to the energy system by 2030. With the support of government in power, we're seeing developers supersize their solar plans and an uptick in large-scale projects entering the planning system. Today, we're going to hear from Rosalind Maxwell Smith, who's the director of Quinbrook Infrastructure Partners, and Josh Corns, the lead solar analyst from the Solar Media Market Research. Quinbrook's behind the UK's first solar NSIP, Cleve Hill, which received a DCO in 2020 and this year secured the largest ever financing for a solar and storage project in the UK. Rosalind, I wonder if you could tell us about the approach you took to the project and some insights into the process.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. If I was to say anything about Cleve Hill, I would say it has been an experience of a lifetime to have everybody look at you as you take on something first. So the team at Quinbrook, the team and others that we have worked with have all been very, very brave and patient because it has faced challenges because we're breaking ground. If I could introduce Quinbrook, I would say we're an energy transition specialist. And the one thing that's special is we were building the US's largest solar project about 18 months before we started Cleve Hill, and that is actually double the size. So we knew we had the expertise to take on something of the scale, but when you're delivering 373 megawatts or 560,000 panels, which is what is on Cleve Hill, it takes a village. You're raising that child. And I would have said we cannot speak about Cleve without speaking about the original developers, Hive and Versol. They first identified the site in 2014. They identified a single landmass that was 900 acres. 138 acres of Cleve Hill is dedicated to habitat management. So we aren't building panels across the whole site. And habitat management impacts on the ecosystem is central actually to everything we do at Quinbrook, and was one of the key things that we have focused on working with the RSPB, Natural Resources, Kent Wildlife Trust, Environment Agency, to keep us in line as we're working through that construction phase. So those are some of the stakeholders. We have private energy partners who helped us when it came to contracting because we're the only ones who've broken ground on an NSIP. So I said that Hive and Versol started in 2014. They put the project into planning in 2018. It got consent in July 2020. And we are only now at the point of nearing the end of construction. It's 5 years. And I just want to give you an idea of the scale of what that means. When you're the only NSIP under construction and it's taken essentially 5 years from consent to getting through construction, we would like to deliver the CP30 targets. To do that, my maths, need roughly about 85, 86 Cleve Hills. But we're the only one under construction. So I think there's an awful lot of knowledge sharing to be done. And there's a lot of construction to get underway with to have a hope of hitting the CP30 targets. I know you wanted to ask me about the financing. Sorry, I'm doing Radio Ros for everybody here. You wanted to ask me about the financing, and I should have spoken more about that. The key thing to what we had done at Cleve Hill is to be aware that we could split the offtake of the power. When we approached the project, we always knew that we would be able to sell the offtake in tranches. The benefit of being transmission connected gave us that. We secured a contract for difference in AR4. And that gave us a base layer of revenues to then start speaking and to really commit to the project and start speaking with lenders. And for lenders, that contract for difference layer of revenue gave that certain level of comfort on the revenue profiling. And then we were able to go from there to approach the market and secure the UK's largest corporate PPA with Tesco's. With an entity or an off-taker, we felt very aligned on our nature ambitions, on our broader climate change ambitions, and to secure 15-year uncapped indexation revenues from an entity that's a FTSE 100 company gave us great comfort. And that was then one of the anchor contracts to allow us to complete the debt financing with Lloyds and NatWest, who I'm very pleased to say that we got there. And again, yes, signed off the UK's largest ever debt financing for a solar project.
And you mentioned there that there's going to have to be a lot of construction to build those 85 more Cleve Hills before clean power. What do you see happening over the next 4.5 to 5 years? How do you think those targets are going to affect the market?
I think we have to think of them as ambitious targets that will not be achieved. But by having a very strong and ambitious target, I hope to see significant investment in supply chain, because I do not currently believe we have enough skilled labour to deliver the projects. That's everywhere from your SAP at the grid through to, do we actually have the EPC contractors with the capacity to deliver this number of projects? And at the same time, the UK, by introducing policy uncertainty, such as, REMA, zonal reform, national reform, there is going to be a change in pricing. And grid connection reform is making itself less attractive versus other countries. So therefore, there is a real challenge to secure capital to commit to these investments. So if I were to think of, we're at this strange moment of flux where we have a government with strong ambition, but we have sincere, real world challenges in terms of delivering on that ambition. And as I say, that would be why, if anyone wants to come up and speak to me at your event about insights I can give them on how to approach contractors, how to approach contracting, where did I see some of the real pinch points in delivering this project, then I would be very happy to share that, because without sharing the knowledge, I think we're going to find it very hard to avoid repeating series of missteps that will lead to a suboptimal delivery of the target.
That's really interesting. And I guess just quickly, since you mentioned it, where do you think REMA should go?
Oh, where do I think REMA should go? Speaking in terms of risk and reward, in times of uncertainty, there is an additional risk premium. We either need to have clear consultation, clear grandfathering for operating projects on demand and supply, and very clear timeline so that those who are either under construction or about to make final investment decision understand the revenue profile of the world they're going to be operating in so they can adjust accordingly. Or we can't have the change without accepting that it will significantly increase the costs of capital. My personal preference, and it is so very personal, would be to see a reformed national price, because my belief is a reformed national price would incur a smaller increase in the cost of capital to deliver the projects. And I very much want to see projects being delivered.
All right, that's great. Thank you. I'm going to hand over to Josh now, who's going to talk us through the solar pipeline in the UK, particularly for large-scale projects that he's been tracking.
Hi guys, thank you Molly for handing over, and thank you for having me on. So today I'm going to be talking about the UK NSIP era, essentially. I've mentioned that phrase a few times, but with Cleve Hill coming to completion, it really has arrived, and I'm going to be breaking down the pipeline. So Again, we're going to be talking about the overall pipeline, the timeline of development, short-term prospects, and then an outlook at CP30. So I've gone for quite a basic slide here, just breaking down large-scale developments. So in the pipeline, there's about 130 gigawatts of projects. However, I mean, a significant chunk of this is large-scale tech projects. So projects at such an early stage, there's no online trail, and sometimes they may not even secured land rights. So removing almost 100 gigawatts of this, we get down to a far more realistic number of 33 gigawatts. So this includes projects that are at scoping phase, so pre-examination on NSIP, or sometimes they may just have a website currently where they outline their red line boundary and prove that they have secured land rights. Some of these projects do include Great North Road Solar Farm in Nottinghamshire and Quinbrook Solar Farm. Once we remove this 20 gigawatts at pre-planning stage, we get the almost 13 gigawatts in planning, with 5.8 gigawatts of this approved. Obviously, Cleve Hill now being completed, the first of many first construction, only on under construction. I've moved it to completion for argument's sake, and then 5.5 gigawatts almost awaiting construction. When we break down the figures a little bit more, we've got 25 projects now into the planning inspectorate in England, 7 projects at ECU level in Scotland, coming up to 800 megawatts now, and then 2 projects at the Welsh DNS or developments of national significance at 350 megawatts. We'll have a look at the timelines a little bit. So Cleve Hill took just over a year to be approved, as Rosalind said, in 2020, and was the first. Little Crow Solar Farm then followed this, which has very recently been acquired by British Solar Renewables, which took approximately 16 months. And then Sunnica Solar Farm was the next. Now, Sunnica was a bit of an anomaly because it took almost 3 years for approval, having been submitted in November 2021. This was largely down to the fact that the Tory government continuously pushed out its approval, and being an NSIP, it obviously has to be approved by the government. And so as soon as Labour came in, it got pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. And then Labour government came in and approved it within a week, alongside Burton Solar Farm and Mallard Pass, which is another project that Quinbrook now own after purchasing it off Window and Canadian Solar. Another shout out to Quinbrook there. So Rosalind again touched on the CFDs. So another first for Cleve Hill. It's the first project in allocation round 4, contract for difference that is. And then in allocation round 6, Longfield Solar Farm and Little Crow Solar Farm both received a CFD, with Longfield being the biggest one to date of 300 megawatts, totaling almost 3/4, if not 3/4, of its total capacity. Let's have a look at Clean Power 2030 now. So just to clarify, this is all transmission scale projects that are currently at planning. So this doesn't necessarily include all NSIPs. For example, Little Crow is a distribution connector project to Northern Power Grid, and so this isn't included on this graph. So the red line on this graph, people are calling this a lollipop, essentially. That's how they're kind of doing their analysis. So the red line identifies the boundary that's given by NESO. I've tried to find it to 10.8 or 11 gigawatts as close as possible. By NESO for pre-2030 for all transmission scale projects. Now, as we can see, anything that's not in planning is above this line, essentially. So all of those scoping projects, such as the Quinbrook Solar Farm, are currently out and over that boundary. So with 800 megawatts almost now operational, 500 megawatts under construction, and then 6 gigawatts and almost 6 gigawatts in planning. So either awaiting construction or awaiting a decision. We go way above this 11 gigawatt line, pushing almost 13 gigawatts. That doesn't bode well for anything that's not currently in planning. However, that doesn't necessarily mean that there's no hope. And there's definitely opportunity for grid connections to still be brought forward. A very welcome change came a few months ago, maybe 2 months ago, where distribution and transmission grid connections were going to be seen in the same pot post 2030, pre 2035. So where previously 17 gigawatts was going to be assigned to transmission scale projects, so a further 6 gigawatts, they're now going to be seen as the same grid connection, or at least pot of grid connection, as distribution connection projects, where on top of the 36 gigawatts that was already assigned to distribution, a further 16 gigawatts was going to be assigned between 2030 and 2035. Essentially, what this means is it opens up a further 22 gigawatts for transmission scale projects, which is, 16 gigawatts more than what was originally anticipated by large-scale developers. Now, this does open up a huge opportunity for those projects that are currently at that scoping phase, and even the projects that have no online trail at the moment, because although some of them do have 2039 grid connection dates these days, and continuously getting further and further out, if these developers start moving on these projects, there's huge potential for those 2039 grid connection dates to be brought forward. Obviously, not before 2030, but certainly opportunity between 2030 and 2035. That's all I have to say on that. Just to note, I could have spoken about a lot more things here. Molly asked me specifically to talk about NSIP and transmission scale projects, but I will be talking at Clean Power 2030 on all things UK solar. So I'll be talking about the distribution connected projects as well, the pipeline for that, as well as CNI and residential rooftop. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. So again, that's both him and Rosalind will be at UK Solar Summit and very open to answering your questions. If you can't wait until then, we're going to go and answer some now that have been put in the chat, and obviously please feel free to keep adding those. The first one, Rosalind, is just asking that apart from the usual time issues, why was it 5 years before Cleve Hill entered construction?
Well, some of that will be before Quinbrook, I call it. We bought the project in October 1st, 2021. We secured the CFD in summer 2022. We're also placing panel orders during the year 2022 and lining up contractors, for EPC, etc. From then on, we also had the challenge of delivery of transformers, and it's the same everyone did, thanks to the invasion of Ukraine and trying to support Ukrainian grid. A lot of transformers went there. And that in the end is key factors on the timeline of construction for Cleve. But I do in the era of pre-Quinbrook, it is, you say, it was a lot of ecological surveys, it was a lot of engagement with the community, and that all then, and also being the first of trying to put your type of technology into the NSIP regime did lead to it taking that length of time to get to the Quinbrook era.
I suppose something that I'd be interested to know is that in the time between taking on Cleve Hill and now taking on Mallard Pass, what, if anything, has changed? How has the process been so far with Mallard? So
we're that much more au fait with what we'd call discharge of requirements, and it's one of the key things is, when you're on a smaller scale project, you get your planning conditions. When you're on an NSIP, you have requirements you have to meet. And there is a certain element of interplay. You have to discharge a requirement saying what your final design is going to be in terms of height, angle, length, number of your solar panels. However, there used to be a fair bit of disparity in the length, width, and depth of panels between manufacturer. So one of the things we actually did do was engage with manufacturers, I'm sure others were doing this too, and other jurisdictions, to say, we really need you to harmonize your dimensions, because it's very tricky running a panel procurement process while also running a design process. And I'm trying to integrate and find the optimal combination of panels for my value of the project, but I also keep getting delayed trying to go into discharge this requirement. So certainly a big benefit now in the industry is that harmonization of panel dimensions, meaning that I can simultaneously run a panel tender and discharge that final design requirement. In other news, I would have said the corporate offtake market has softened significantly, which is going to heavily increase the importance of securing CFDs. There are still a lot of corporate off-takers out there willing to offer long-term corporate power purchase agreements, but you've got few and far between offering you that uncapped indexation that we got with Cleve for Tesco's, and that you get on the CFD.
Interesting, thank you. Josh, I wondered if you would be able to speak a little bit more about the post-2030 combination of transmission and distribution, if you're seeing any effects of that plan yet as projects enter planning.
I think it's a tough one to kind of understand developers' intentions at the moment. It was only announced relatively recently, and that's something we have to wait for over the next kind of year to see developers' intentions and see the very far out grid connections, how much these developers are going to move on those projects. So in terms of smaller scale stuff, companies such as Pathfinder have submitted applications for projects that have 2036 grid connection dates at the moment. So they clearly are trying to get that gate to offer and brought forward pre-2030. And I'm expecting those projects that have 2039 grid connection dates definitely will be lining up, getting their ducks in line in order to kind of push for that 2034, 2033, 2032 grid connection date. But it's a matter of when. And right now, there have been, I think, 3 projects be submitted in the last 2 months into NSIP. So like steeple renewables projects. And maybe that is because of that announcement, but at the same time, there's no real intention shown by developers yet to understand that.
Yes, you can't track the reasons behind what they're all doing.
Exactly. I think it would definitely increase the amount of NSIP projects moving. So we will see an uptick, I'm sure, of that, especially with projects even just hitting NSIP, let alone hitting applications at NSIP level.
Thank you. We've had a little flurry of questions here. First off, Rosalind, responding to what you were saying about sourcing your panels, did you end up with a mixture of manufacturers for the panels that you used for Cleve Hill?
All with one. We got 6 or 7 to come into line and produce harmonious dimensions. It's in one provider.
And then the next one is about the skill gap that you highlighted, and is relying on the market sufficient for solving that, or is there a more centralized industrial strategy required? Who do you see as the principal actors in addressing the skills gap?
So I have tried to raise it at every forum I can, whether that's with NESO, DESNES, Ofgem, industry-wide, and National Grid as well, because to anyone who has a project that requires a SAP, protect your SAP, look after your SAP, build the best relationship you can with them, because if they end up not being able to come to site because another project's taken priority, your timeline goes. and there is a real lack of resource. They're very overworked, and there are a lot of projects that require their expertise to get connected to the grid. So I have been highlighting left, right and centre a need to train them, to find more, and to make sure they don't get poached by other regions.
Were there any unusual or additional requirements that the debt providers highlighted when they were reaching the financial investment decision for Cleve Hill, and that's compared to smaller scale projects?
Yeah, I think firstly, Cleve was right next to the sea. But I think had a smaller scale project been built right next to the sea, they would have also wanted to look at the flood defences. But we very much had focus on flood defences and sort of the resiliency of the site, because every challenge that you face with a smaller project is getting faced in tenfold when you're at the scale. So I think what I would have said is we had chosen to do a split contract approach rather than taking on a wrapped EPC. And that required a lot of diligence, because a split contract approach with the scale of the project, any in single one point of failure could have been a major problem. I have a big shout out to my colleagues at Private Energy Partners who have been managing all those contracts and have been on site ensuring that delivery. So I think I'd love to say we were special. I think we were just bigger. Although the battery safety management plan and the approval of that did require a lot of focus. Sorry, that was an NSIP specific. For anyone who wants some learnings on how to manage discharge of a battery safety management plan requirement, I might need some very large cup of tea, but I'll be able to chat you through that.
They big and special don't have to be distinct from one another. Maybe it was both. There's a technical query here about the fact that for Mallard Pass, you're considering using solar tracking, which is not something that you did at Cleve Hill. Yep. And has something changed? How come the decision was taken back then not to, and could be to this time?
So Cleve Hill was consented with an east-west array, which is why you can see in that little snippet of photo the sort of density of panels. This actually tends to make your generation smoother, rather than being very peaky or very big shoulders. It makes everything smoother in your generation profile. Our forecast or belief is that we will see strong price cannibalization in midday. With the amount of solar coming online, you can start to see, even in the month of May, quite an impact of that level of solar generation coming on. For Mallard, it was approved with a Rochdale envelope, which means it can, there was a very broad scope, and it could be fixed and it could be tracker. And I think that was quite a smart move from Recurrent and Windale, because it future-proofs and allows for advances in technology or in efficiency, which they weren't able to per se control at the time that they went into planning. So a lot of the work we've been undertaking now is design optimization. What is going to give the best returns to the project, allowing for the risks of O&M or the risks of technology failure in a tracker system, but increased yield, versus the more known world of fixed tilt. And I think a lot of projects going into the NSIP regime now do have a tracker element. I can think of a couple that have consent on the basis of tracker. So one thing I would say to people is they're considering technology is, if you look at the mix now, I think there are only 2 tracker projects in the UK, and they're quite small. But given the volume of consented NSIP, there will be some consented some operating tracker NSIPs, which will improve supply chain, which will improve maintenance of parts, which should drive down those costs.
And I noticed Josh nodding there at the NSIPs coming into planning now with tracker elements. I'm just going to keep rattling through the questions as they come in. We're wondering if you have the same timelines for the Cleve Hill BESS system to be built as for the solar part, and is that with the same EPC?
So we are entering, so we're doing the design phase. I think we'll be able to take learnings from delivering Cleve to improve the construction timeline. It will help not building on a marshy bog, because I would use the phrase waterlogged. Does happen. No flooding, very important to distinguish the two when you're right next to the sea. It's waterlogging, not flooding. We have been very pleased with the performance of our EPC partner, but there will be a live tender, because I always have to think of the best interests of our investors for every project. So there would be a tender that will be undertaken. And if there are any interested EPC parties, please do get in touch. If people want references for how pleased we have been with the delivery of Cleve Hill, I can do that. But I would say, yes, EPC parties should reach out. We will be conducting a tender, because I always have to do what's best for the investors in the next project.
Cool. With panel procurement, is the ongoing maintenance considered? The design at Cleve Hill will prompt the market to define a solution if it's not already. And Dan, who asked this, is interested in understanding if there's an established best practice for that.
Would you be able to repeat the question? I'm trying to think. Was it relating to O&M at Cleve Hill? Sorry.
So is ongoing maintenance, like cyclical panel cleaning, considered when you're procuring?
Yes, and actually more so procuring the O&M services, yes. So all sorts of ongoing permanent monitoring are included. We want to spot immediately if one array isn't performing. We want to be able to have programmed panel cleaning, yes. One of the nuances at Cleve, which wouldn't be repeated at another site, because we're so close to the sea, we have our big sea wall. But another flood mitigation was to build the panels at quite a height that you wouldn't normally see for a solar park. That means when it comes to O&M, it's actually not as simple to do the cleaning as you would expect at a regular fixed tilt site, because you actually need to get working at height sort of provisions.
Great, thank you. There's a note here about Tracker, that there are 2 sites in the UK being built right now. Josh, I wonder if that's something that you can confirm.
I can't think of the exact sites. I think I know. I think I know the developer, but I'm not to speculate just in case I get in trouble for being wrong. But I do know that trackers are definitely becoming popular. There's a couple of manufacturers that are really doing a big push in the UK. Because they're very popular. So the UK is now the next focus. I actually had a question for you, Rosalind, on solar panels. So I wasn't sure if I should just ask you or type it in the chat, to be honest.
Go for it. You've got special privileges.
Thank you. In terms of the modules, I know you went with one specific supplier for Cleve Hill. Is the intention to go kind of developers, when they're looking to procure modules, obviously have dimensions and very specific things they want about the modules? Do you ask module suppliers to kind of custom make them at all, or do you kind of rule out module suppliers, just you go with 2 because they're the only 2 that have those specifications?
Well, the lovely thing about how the market has now evolved is there is far greater uniformity in height, length, depth of the panels. If you go across the tier 1 manufacturers, they nearly all actually, for the latest 600X peak panels, are all the same dimensions. And then it's only when you're getting into the next generation, I'm just going to call it the 700X type panels, that again the size and those dimensions change. So we haven't ever had to ask for bespoke, but we have had to outline the challenges that you face when you are delivering them. And I it'd be completely remiss of me not to say that we push for for American level provenance for our panels. And that actually became a gating item for the debt process. And by that, I mean auditability, traceability, verification rights, not just for the panel, not just for the silicon, the polysilicon or the silicon, but now the market has evolved to get you that provenance all the way to quartz. And we would push any supplier to give us that level of provenance. And it becomes a gating item in the tender if you can or can't do that. So that's actually something we've pushed on very hard with panel suppliers.
Cool. Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up there. We've overrun ever so slightly. But to reiterate again, at the UK Solar Summit, which is on the 1st and 2nd of July, both Rosalind and Josh are around to speak to in the networking breaks. They're also both speaking, so you can catch them in several capacities in a couple of weeks' time. But thank you everyone for joining.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.